Almost there. There we go. Um, all right. So today we're going to talk about brain-based function. This is going to include dementia. This is going to include epilepsy. This is going to include traumatic brain injury. This is going to include some of the autism stuff, some of the vaccine damage stuff. This is going to include, some of the PTSD stuff like that. Um, it's always funny. Um, so I had epilepsy for like 20 years, grand mal seizures out of nowhere, the whole deal. And when we're talking about the brain, what we have to understand is that people look at the brain like it's so difficult. And I don't know, maybe it is. I really love it. And so it's something I've been able to study for a long time. Um, but it's very similar to a lot of the other things in the body. The metabolic function requires certain things. If it doesn't have those things, it doesn't work right. We see the issues with the brain a lot easier. They manifest in mental health issues, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, ADD, stuff like that. Like they present in ways where like, oh, there it is, whereas you can't see diabetes in people very easily. You can't see hormonal dysregulation in people very easily. But you can see it in people like, if they're having a grand mal seizure, you can see that. So we think of them as much more difficult, and they're not necessarily more difficult. They're just more visible. And so when we start talking about these things, it's kind of like a plant, right? And if I can boil this down in the easiest way, if your plant's not growing, you go, am I watering it? Am I feeding it? Does it get sunlight? Those things, right? Those are the things we start kind of checking first. Same thing with brain. Is it getting all the oxygen it needs? Is it getting all the ATP it needs? Is it getting all of the chemicals it's supposed to have? And if it is, it should be working right. And if it's not, we either missed a chemical that it's supposed to have, or it's got too much of a chemical it's not supposed to have. So one of those two things is going on. So when we start looking at, let's start with epilepsy. There's a lot of things that we look at for epilepsy. The first ones we always start with, especially if they're adults, is going to be airway function. So we're going to do sleep studies. And what I find hilarious about this is that we get people in and I'm like, have you done a sleep study? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, great, send it to me. And they send it to me and it's like right at that 91, 92 mark. And their doctor's like, that's within the range. You're fine. And I always laugh and I'm like, you're at 91% of the oxygen. Oxygen's the number one most important thing for your brain. You have a brain-based disorder and you think 10% off is acceptable. And so we jack those up, and lots of times what we end up seeing is that when we get the oxygen levels up high enough, we see significant changes. The other thing that I'll see all the time is people will have horrible sleep studies. And they'll send them to me and I'm like, oh yeah, man, this is terrible. And they're like, yeah, don't worry, I got a CPAP, or don't worry, I got a mouthpiece. The mouthpiece ones I hear more often than not. CPAPs are great, but most people won't use them right. They don't get enough, then when people walk through that with them. Anyway, so they'll have the mouthpiece and everything. I'm like, great. And I'm like, have you had a second sleep study? And they're like, why would I do that? Like, well, you had a problem. We came up with a solution for it. Did you test the solution to make sure it worked? And people are like, no, my doctor never told me to do that. Okay. Yeah, because you're not going to get paid for it by insurance. So the docs don't run it. But checking to make sure your solution worked is really, really important, because there's two types of apnea. Remember this. There's obstructive apnea, which causes all your snoring and stuff like that. And then there's centralized apnea, which you get damage from vaccines, from head trauma, from food sensitivity issues, allergies. There's all sorts of reasons why you get this one, where you just stop breathing. And if you put a mouthpiece in your mouth, it'll help the obstructive sleep apnea to quite a degree, but it does nothing for centralized apnea. And a lot of people have both. I have both. And so what ends up happening is if you just give these people a mouthpiece, they're still having an oxygen deprivation issue. They're still going to have neurologic issues. They're still going to have problems. They're going to get concussions easier. They're going to have longer healing from concussions. They're going to have, faster neural degeneration. So you're going to end up having memory issues, brain fog issues, you're going to, things like that, higher rates of dementia, Alzheimer's, stuff like that. So higher instances of just dying early, heart attacks and strokes, stuff like that. So you need to make sure that when you give a solution, you test the solution to make sure that you got the whole problem solved. Well, there's a lot of times we'll test people again when we give them CPAPs, and we have to send them oxygen concentrators because their oxygen's still not high enough. So there's a lot more to sleep studies than just get a mouthpiece and you're done. So that's one of the issues that we always have to look into. This is for dementia, this is for depression, for all of them. So that's one major caveat. The other one is, if you've got brain-based disorders, you need to go with the diet that has been proven for 100 and something years to have substantial, ridiculous high levels of success treating this thing. So the keto diet, the real keto diet, was designed specifically to treat epilepsy, and it's amazing at it. Like when they've done this research, they've taken a whole bunch of people with epilepsy, with brain-based disorders, and they put them on the real keto diet, and 50-60% of them no longer have epilepsy. Gone, finished, out. So that's a giant chunk of people. Now, when we talk about keto diets, we talk about diets, I rarely put people on a real keto diet. A real keto diet is like 4-to-1 fat. Like it is really, really high. Like you got people who are just, eating coconut oil with a spoon, or eating butter, or eating, taking shots of olive oil like the Greeks do. Like this is a thing. And then they really, like when you prescribe this stuff for significant brain-based disorders, that's kind of where you're going. A lot of people will get better with this standard low glycemic diet. And so, and again, there's, if you guys are not familiar with this, but most people aren't, there's the standard American diet, which is literally poisoning yourself horribly. No one ever should run this diet. And so here, that's like a zero diet. And then you come up to like a standard low glycemic that I would put most people on for weight loss, for health, things like that. That's on a scale, like a keto scale, that's like a 6. The taking shots of olive oil, or eating coconut oil with a spoon thing, that's closer to like a 9 or a 10. But there's a gradation function of this, and not everybody can run a keto diet. And there's a lot of people we got to ease into the glycemic function a little bit. So that's a big one. But if you're noticing that you've got these issues, if you've got kids got epilepsy, you've got depression, you've got some of these mental health issues, I would get with somebody immediately who understands how to do this. And the 3 things I would look at are going to be, the sleep study stuff, and not just one. Do one, find a solution, then check your solution to make sure it worked right. 2, I would start putting them on. I would strip all processed food out, and I would put them on a higher fat, like no carb, higher fat diet. You're going to need somebody to walk you through that. It is possible to do on your own. It's taken me 10 years of significant study to figure out how to do it properly. So you can do the same thing. You can spend 10 years reading research for hours and hours until you figure it out, or you can have somebody who knows what they're doing walk you through it. So I would recommend that you have somebody walk you through it. The other thing is I would look very heavily about regeneration function of the brain. So you're looking at, and I would look at, hormone levels, especially if you're an adult, where your testosterone levels are, where your growth hormone levels are. Those 2, I would spend a lot of time making sure you get those exactly where they're supposed to be, because those 2 are going to play a significant role. And then the easy, I know this is 4, but the easy thing that I would make sure that you're getting in is all of your methylated B vitamins. Like I'm not going to worry about any other nutrient but methylated B vitamins. Work on your methylated B vitamins. There's such a substantial piece of it. And, I talk about this all the time with people. I'm like, you can go and you can get the DNA test. We will run your DNA test for you. I love the DNA test that we do. There is oodles and oodles and oodles of information on it. I think like the last one we did for somebody, I think was like 300 pages of information. And so I went through and explained it all to him. You can do that, and it's fantastic. If you'll just take methylated B vitamins, like the Superior B, we have on the website, we have in the office, about 90% of those things you don't have to worry about. You just, okay, I'm giving my body all the methylated B vitamins it needs. I say 90% because if you don't have intrinsic factor, it's gonna be hard to pull B12 in. And we can look for that, and it's easy to see because we give you a bunch of methylated B12 and we don't get resolution. And we're like, well, it's obviously, we don't have to do any more testing. It's most likely an intrinsic factor function. And so we can bring that in. But that's kind of where a lot of this brain stuff is. Like, those are the things we check first. Like, are we getting plenty of oxygen? Are we getting the maximum amount of oxygen we can? have we stripped out, the processing and stuff like that that are obvious toxins? Are we getting the methyl B vitamins the body needs? And do we have the ability to regenerate and heal? There's a lot more to it, but if you'll start there, you're going to get 30-40% of your issues resolved with, with epilepsy, with I'll throw depression in there, I'll throw anxiety in there to a degree. Dementia, you're going to see good turnaround on that as well. So that's the thing. Like those are the pieces that if you're like, oh, I really want to take care of my brain long term, or we have a kid with epilepsy or whatever, those are a lot of the things I would start looking at first. If your doc's not looking at those first and they're just being like, well, here's an anticonvulsant or here's an antidepressant or something like that, you can co-treat. That works really, really well. You can work with a guy like me and somebody who's going to sling pills at you. And I'm not saying that slinging pills is necessarily the wrong answer, especially at the beginning, because it can help. Long term, what we see with those things is that they help less and less. We have to go up in dose higher and higher, and then all of a sudden they're just not working very well at all, and your problems are so substantial that nobody can do anything about them, because you've never corrected the root problem, which was either a toxin you didn't get rid of, or a nutrient or a variety of nutrients your body needed that wasn't getting. And so the damage just goes on and on and on. So if you'll start there, that's going to be probably the best place to do for a lot of these things. It's funny. I've got, in like 3 weeks, I've got a class. I'm teaching a bunch of therapists about using metabolic health and diet and this type of stuff to help treat these issues that these therapists and counselors and psychologists are working with. Because what we're starting to see is that the body is in fact needs to be looked at from a holistic standpoint. We have to understand that, we've got, the chemical stuff we got to deal with. There is some functional movement we got to do, and then we do have to get into the mind and start working with people about the way they perceive the world and how they deal with things and that type of thing. So yeah, like, as we're starting to learn more and get away from the lies that, we've been told for the last 50 years, about how the body functions, what we're starting to see is that, we can make substantial corrective functional changes. The problem is that this is the biggest problem. And I'll tell you, this is the thing that makes everything work or not work. The patient has to play in. Like, it's like weight loss. Like if you don't do the diet, you don't do the exercises, you don't do the supplementation, you don't sleep right, you don't do the things you're supposed to do. And then you're like, well, the plan didn't work. No, you didn't run the plan, and that's where we see quite often. I've got, and I have these patients, everybody has these patients who are just non-compliant. They don't do, you set them down, you're like, okay, here's the diet, here's the supplements, and here's the exercises. And they do about 30% of each of it. And they're like, it didn't work for me. I'm like, well, you didn't run the plan. So that's the hardest part. And I'll tell you, like right now, if you're looking for a pill so that you don't have to do anything, don't work with me. You're not going to get any better. You're going to have to actively participate. You're going to have to change your diet. You're going to have to do a little bit of moving. You're going to move, get up and exercise a little bit. And you're going to have to start sleeping. You're going to have to make alterations to your lifestyle for your body and for your health to get better. And if you're not willing to make those alterations, you're not going to get any better. That is the key to this whole thing. So I should preface this and be like, if you want to get better health and you're willing to put some effort into it, give us a call and we'll be able to help you get through it. I'll walk you through it. I'll coach you through it, and we'll be able to make alterations as we go, and you will get better. But if you're not going to do any of the work, go take a pill and hope and pray. If you guys have any other questions, hit us up, questions@chalmerswellness.com. DM me like you guys normally do. And we'll be able to help you guys out. If you have any other questions, send them to us. I did a podcast with Dr. Artis yesterday. Great guy. Lots of great information. That guy's pretty cool. He brings a lot of receipts. I love that. When he's like, here's a crazy thing. And you're like, what? And he's like, here's all the research. And you go, oh, all right. Because he sent me a bunch of the research and a lot of it's in his new book. So I highly recommend you guys check out his new book, the lies about COVID-19. Just Google Dr. Artis book and you'll be able to find it. It's ARDIS. You guys have a good time. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for your time.